Hello, welcome. Nice to meet you. Thank you for attending today. You want to get your names down? Uh, my name is Derek Cowell, and I've been doing this literally for 20 years, since 2004. My approach to the class is a little different, um, but sorry, I can't dual task very well, can I? Uh, I'm going to explain my style of teaching and the types of assignments that you'll be doing this semester. Okay. And I hope that you guys, I hope you enjoy it actually. Uh, but does either of you, Monte, Brian, does either of you have any comments or questions? You guys good? All right. Well, I'm going to take your silence as in a positive way. And so thank you, Monte. That's a real pretty scenery right there. I love Carmel in that area. It reminds me of it. So what I'm going to go ahead and do now is I'm going to share the screen and just share a few things about myself and the class, okay? As an introduction. So this is History 31. It's Mexican American history. I know it sounds bragging, but I started this class at one particular JC. Such was my not expertise, but my interest and my passion for it. I love it. I love Mexican American history, and so I've been doing it for about 10 years almost. Oh, good. We have another member here. That's great. Welcome, Giselle. Uh, so at any rate, I'll go ahead and just get right into it. Okay. So my goals with this class, right, is firstly, right, I want to have you uh, have students acquire knowledge, okay, of topics broadly associated with popular narratives of Mexican American history. All right. So there's just certain things, right? And that's what's so fun about teaching and being an instructor in college is they give you a lot of latitude to use your own book, to use your own style, et cetera, which of course I'm very grateful for. But at the same time, right? It's probably a different acronym now, but a few years back they were called SLOs, student learning outcomes, and so what they wanted is they wanted certain things to be established, no matter who was teaching the class, right? And that included certain what they thought were almost universally considered pivotal um, epics, events, people tied to that type of history that you're studying. So, needless to say, I want you to be familiar with that which is very widely covered in Mexican American history. All right. Uh, in addition to that, I want you to become familiar with historiography. Now, all that is, that's a fancy word that doesn't mean anything fancy. That's just the art and science of history. Okay. It's how an historian does his or her thing. And we're going to get to that real soon. So, at any rate, become familiar with historiography, uh, particularly on this topic. Okay. And so, remember, a big part of this, right, is grad school. I remember going to, I don't have my PhD, it was just for a master's. But I remember doing it at night, working during the day. And my instructor, right, my professor would say, all right, Cowell, here is so and so's take on this topic. And then here is a very divergent, a very different view on the same topic by so and so. By next week, I want you to have read both books. and I want you to try to compare, contrast, and synthesize the two together into what you've learned and what you've learned about the historians and how they look at the topic. And as soon as I had to do that as a student, I had a premonition of what I wanted to do as an instructor. And so that really helped me. I remember another time being in a very brilliant, but very, very ideologically one-sided professor. And he said he asked what I thought about a given topic, right? And I'm not just staying vague. I can't recall what the topic was, but I know he was talking about the exploitation of the workers and the Darwinian nature of the economic system. And he said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Well, that sounds good if you're a Marxist historian." And he just grinned. And like I said, those type of experiences, I thought I am not going to try to brainwash my students. I'm not trying to come up with some monolithic view of Mexican Americans and how things have happened the way they have, and make you memorize that view of mine. Okay, not at all. So for any of you going on to grad school, and it may not even be history, it may be another social science. This is giving you a head start into that, into analyzing different sources coming from different perspectives, okay? And then in addition to that, I want you to hone your critical thinking skills. All right? And I'm very proud of this as an instructor, is I try to give you the tools. I try to give you information from multiple areas, and then I put it on you. I put it on you to see what you think of it. And honest to goodness, I'm not being falsely modest. I never fail to learn from some of my students. Some of the stuff they write and put together, I'm like, wow, I had never thought of it that way. That was a very, very intelligent point. And so, but absolutely, I want you to hone your critical thinking skills, because no matter what you're majoring in, no matter what you do as your job, right? Just if nothing else, as a citizen of this republic, you should be a critical thinker. Oh, thank you, Brian. So at any rate, right? So you have that. And then also, I'd like to think that it is more engaging for those less inclined to study history, right? I think it makes it more engaging, a little bit more interesting, okay? As I try to be thought-provoking and so forth, okay? And so remember, I want to do this also as a, to make a note of this, okay? Is when I write an argumentative piece, it is as if I am acting, okay? It's a book I have read, an opinionated professor I had, etc. All right? I choose that argument either because it simply stimulates critical thought, or because it is representative of a major debate or source of discourse, right? Discourse is just what people talk about. Major debate or source of discourse on Mexican American history. All right. So please note what I'm going to ask you to do. Okay. Humbly ask that you engage in at least 2 tasks. Okay. Firstly, please cite, and yes, this is somewhat regurgitating, but it's also showing that you could winnow through the opinionated demonstrative sentences, the data and the facts that I try to use and so forth, right? That you could discern the thesis. Please cite the thesis and an example or two of how the writer defends such. Okay? Then, secondly, and this one is all on you, defend your evaluation as to how credible the section seems to you. Okay? So that's all I asked, those two. So technically, right, I believe they would be called analysis, pick it apart and show me what the thesis is, and evaluation, putting value on how credible or not so, right? And so please remember, feel free to tear into everything you read. You don't like the logic of it, you don't think there's enough data to support it, etc., right? Because of course I'm trying to give it a go to every thesis that I put down. But for one, right, like I said, sometimes I'm doing it tongue in cheek with a smile, remembering the professor that advocated that, or remembering the book that I had read that posited that thesis. It is not necessarily what I believe. Okay. And secondly, I'm highly fallible. Sometimes I've had it. I've become aware through students' evaluation just how weakly defended a given section is. So I'm a big boy. I can handle it. Okay. And of course, right, I would never grade you on where you take your stand on your evaluation. All I'm looking for is just do you intelligently, logically, or factually defend your point, right? And so I have students ask me, like, how long does it have to be? And that is very tough to quantify. Okay. I've had some students that were so concise in their verbiage and they got right to the point. They gave an example or two. They had an intelligent point as to why it was not very credible. And they do it in like a third of a page. Okay. And then I have others who are spectacular in finally getting to the points, right? They kind of get around it a little bit for a while, and by the bottom of the page, they've hit the mark. And so it's hard to try to ascribe a given length that I'm asking of you. So all that I ask, right, is that if it is short, I don't want it to appear, I hate to say it, but I just don't want it to appear lazy, that you didn't put much thought into it. You didn't cite any of the supporting data. You just cited the thesis basically, and that was about it. Yeah, so you know what I mean? So like I said, don't feel like you have to write, a page, 2 pages. But make sure that you just hit that criteria if you don't mind. Okay? And like any subjective style of teaching, you guys are going to get a hang of this in no time, and it's going to become a piece of cake. And like I said, I hope that you find some of the arguments that I put together halfway interesting and thought-provoking, even if you disagree with every one. Okay? So please keep that in mind. And I want to apologize also for the pace of the class, which obviously is out of my hands. But remember, as I mentioned, the slows, the certain basic things that need to be covered. Needless to say, they want us to get through the Chicano movement during the civil rights movement, right? For Mexican-American history. So we got to get moving. And so basically, you're going to have about 3 days to do each assignment. And then it's due at midnight, okay? And then also note that I'm always trying I try to find a balance between being gracious and being fair. So for instance, right, those of you who are doing it every 3 days and turning it in on time, you deserve to be rewarded for that. Just as you who are here, right? I wrote down your names. You're going to get extra credit to your first assignment added to it, to your raw score for being here. And so, with people that are playing catch up and make up an assignment after the due date and so forth, I don't feel that it's fair that they should be able to even possibly get a 50 out of 50 in fairness to those who did it on time. But when I deduct points, right, I'm a softie. Like usually I'll deduct just 5, maybe 10 points. And so 40 points, right, out of 50 is so much better than 0 out of 50. So make sure by the end of the semester you have no zeros, okay? You have no blanks. Please turn in something, even if it's late, for every assignment, because it adds up, okay? So before I move on, I'll ask again, does anybody have any comments or questions? Okay, okay. So the subjective part of writing history, right? First of all, this is kind of cheesy, but I was taught a certain acronym for history, and it was SOP. Okay, the first thing historians do, right, is you select facts. Well, guess what? That means you also, oh, I'm a terrible speller. Is that right? Oh, I got lucky. At any rate, SOP, right? You select facts, but while you're selecting facts, you're choosing to omit other facts that you're declaring are not relevant enough to be cited, right? So already you have a subjective part of history, the writing of history, right? Because, you stand on top of a building. I mean, God forbid, don't do this. Stand on top of a building and say, I don't believe in gravity, and take a step, right? You're going to fall. Gravity doesn't care if you believe in it or not. There are objective truths in the world, but history is not one of them. History is subjective. It's like, okay, who's the best NFL or NBA player in history, right? People can marshal facts and logical arguments for quite a few different gentlemen or women, right? And so that's what we're looking at with history. So first you select facts, you choose to omit others, right? Then you organize facts. You organize or slash basically interpret. Okay. And so you'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't, how often the same data uh is used for inference, right? I'm assuming, I'm hoping I'm using inference in the correct way, that you find a fact here, you find a fact there, and you use your logic to put the dots together, right? That's what historians do. And so when they're looking at this fact and that fact, and they find even some common facts, some will infer different conclusions from the same data, right? So you select or omit facts, then you organize or interpret them, and then finally you present. And there's much in the delivery. When I think of presentation, I think of Howard Zinn. At the turn of the millennium, he had written a book, A People's History of the U.S. And on page 10 of that book, he admits that he is a Marxist historian, right? And there are a lot of assumptions that come with that. And so he lets it be known. And so his verbiage and how he articulates himself and the data that he selects, it all makes sense, right? It's all congruent with the work of a Marxist conflict historian. Okay. So at any rate, I'm going to go to that now, if you don't mind. We're almost done with this part. Different historical assumptions and approaches. All right. So first of all, right, some people, when it comes to causation, some people look to material factors like, see, I can't see very well. I'm looking for the dollar sign. Okay. So some people look at material factors. Others look at ideological, beliefs, culture, etc. Okay. Some look for the role of key individuals, while others look for faceless, large forces like the economy, the culture, etc. Okay. So, especially when it comes to causation, what caused something to happen, uh, people start off right off the bat with their own assumptions as to what really triggers change in history. And that dictates the type of facts they're looking for and that they find and use. Okay. So, different names. Okay. Court history. Court history is from the perspective of the winners, right? We borrow from sociology and we split history into three categories: political, economic, and social, right? So, especially those who have won as far as power dynamics in all three categories, right? So, maybe like, the founding fathers of the US, etc. Political control, economic hegemony or domination, uh, being able to dictate culture as well. So an emperor, right, tells a scribe, "I want you to write a history of me and of my rule." Well, if that scribe wants to keep his or her head, right, that scribe is going to rationalize or justify, praise, right, the winners. That's court history. Okay. Then you have by the broad definition, revisionist history. Revises or changes the initially dominant interpretation. Okay. So usually the initial interpretation, right, is written by the winners. As they say, history is written by the winners, right? So very often, not always, but quite often, the first interpretation of an event uh, is done in such a way, like court history, where it justifies and praises everything done by the winners. Okay. So revisionists, right, they just simply want to revise or change that interpretation. So some of the revisions are pretty moderate, and then others are very, very, um, uh, I hate to say extreme because that sounds negative, but you know what I mean. Then you could become downright like that fancy word iconoclastic. Iconoclastic means you smash sacred idols, right? So you say, uh, you know, the Spanish conquistadors were as Las Casas said, were wolves and tigers, and they raped and pillaged the Americas. Okay. So then you have conflict history. Focuses upon competition for political, economic, and social leverage, eliciting readers' compassion and indignation. Remember that word comes from religion. Indignation is like holy anger, righteous anger, something that you should be angry about, some horrible injustice. So they want to elicit our compassion and our indignation, right, for those who lost. So basically, it's the opposite of court history. Okay, conflict history. Right. So in addition to that, you have trying to think. other things that will be quite often mentioned or even employed in the class. Um, hmm. Functional history. No heroes and villains. Simply a view of a nation as an organic being. So like a human, right? Seeing each demographic, and remember, demographic is just a generic word for a category of the population. So your age, your gender, right? Your political views, and also, but most of the time, right, in history, demographic entails writing about ethnic groups and socioeconomic groups, right? People that did the same thing for a living, have roughly the same jobs in the same economic class. Okay, so they see each demographic as one part of that living being, showing how each demographic makes its contributions to the growth of the nation. So functional history, right? It's not as dramatic. It's not about playing the game of guilt and heroes and villains, but just each demographic. To me, right, I can't think of a more telling example in my mind of functional history as when they show how the cash crop of cotton, and before that, right, of rice and indigo and tobacco, how those cash crops um, made the whole U.S. economy um, roll. And so hence the slaves did their part. The slaves were like the legs of the body, right? And you can imagine how some people are not happy with functional history, right? Because it's like, wait a minute, that's too benign. Like, what about all the savagery, all the suffering that the slaves incurred? You're not even going to address that at all. You're just going to show how they contributed, their labor contributed to, economic growth. And so, but to each his own, right? That's another view. That's another type of history that's written out there in the books. All right. And so, let's see here. And then, of course, you have with Mexican American history, a lot of people want a utility, a usefulness to this history. So a lot of people say, well, one part of utility would be Mexican Americans coming to know their own identity, right? Through the history. Okay, so you have that. You have some focus on their. I'm thinking of some of the most famous Chicano history books, right? So there's a guy named Felipe Armesto. Felipe Armesto. Oh gosh, yeah, I have him right there. At any rate, the book I have of his is called Our America by Felipe Armesto something. But at any rate, Our America, you have Harvest of Empire is another one that I could have used if I wanted to use a textbook. Uh, um, Rodolfo Cunez. Um, you have your well-known Chicano historians, and a lot of them, right? They do this last one is they fight against. I'm sorry, not American history. American exceptionalism, because that's part of court history, right? is they contend that the U.S. is a special country. It's a special country as far as the liberties that we enjoy, and it's a special country as far as the alleged equality of economic opportunity that we all enjoy. So sometimes in the Mexican American histories, they very adamantly challenge that notion of America's exceptionalism. Right. So I might be leaving out a couple, but as we go through, if you don't mind, I'll just hit on it when we get to that section because that's all that's coming to my mind right now. Um, but as you're looking at this, right? Well, if you don't mind, I'm gonna stop sharing this. Okay, I'll be happy to post this if you like, if it's helpful at all. Um, but let's see here. I'm looking for Native American sample argument. So on this one, right? I say there are scientific methods to that are pretty impressive in their ability to help man infer what happened with the Native Americans prior to written history. Okay. However, look at the end there in red. Studying Native American history before the arrival of Europeans conveys the frustrating and humbling reality that science can only get us so far. So here are some of the methods. Tree ring dating, dendrochronology, carbon-14 dating, thermoluminescence dating. They could find out when a piece of pottery was initially fired up. Suboceanic isotope analysis. I don't know a thing about that. All I know is that's what's used to discern if and when we've had ice ages. Okay. Pollen analysis, study of diseases, molecular and evolutionary biology, microsatellite analysis, and stratigraphy. Stratigraphy is fun. Some of the findings they've had. So for instance, right, different areas have different rates of erosion and they familiarize themselves with that. And then they know that, hardpan, limestone, eventually the erosion process is stopped by these impenetrable types of stone under the ground. Okay. And it forms layers. So at a given layer, they especially feel good when the mineral composition is homogeneous. It's all the same. Like there's the exact same amount of like sodium nitrate and other things in that soil. Okay. So they come to the conclusion that this level underneath the ground was all contemporary. They all existed at the same time. Okay. And they lucked out. In some cases, they found it was either a woolly mammoth or a mastodon, and it had an intelligently fluted projectile weapon lodged in its rib cage. And then not very far away at the same stratigraphic level underground, they found human remains and they found hunting gear. So, right, they say, okay, I think it's safe to infer that mankind was contemporary with the megafauna, with the big animals, right, at the end of the Ice Age, and he hunted them. Excuse me. So at any rate, so it's the granted but approach, right? Granted, these are pretty impressive. They could discern this, they could discern that. But look at the word nevertheless there. Now you know I'm going to take a turn, huh? Nevertheless, such impressive methods do not provide a definitive narrative of precisely what happened or when. According to archaeologist and Cambridge-educated Dr. Jane McIntosh, such scientific methods are often not capable of effecting or bringing about conclusive claims, because carbon dating necessitates the assumption that the amount of C14 present in the atmosphere has remained constant, which she contends is not the case due to the burning of fossil fuels and nuclear explosions. Dr. McIntosh concludes that radioactive decay is a random process and cannot be predicted with certainty. So notice I'm only going off of one person, what she says. To what extent then can scientists date objects with certainty? Dendrochronology relies upon certain conditions. The trees must be sensitive and not complacent. They must be of uniform width. The historical edifice being dated must not be an older building supported with newer wood, or they'll get fooled by how long ago it was. And one must hope that there do not exist aberrations like missing or false rings, which do evidently happen. Regarding scientists' quest to decipher when plants were first hybridized in the farming or Neolithic revolution, and to develop a chronological narrative of the dissemination of cultivating certain crops, palynology, right, suffers from a present scarcity of institutions and dedicated scientists, as well as from limited technology. And then what I do is I bash C. Vance Haynes' thesis. See, I'm old enough to remember back in the 90s, they said this as if it were an established fact, okay? That in the last Wisconsin ice era, 13,000 years ago, through water displacement of the Ice Age, the Native Americans came from Alaska or from Siberia into Alaska virtually by foot through the displacement of the water. And then there is evidence of two major glacial sheets having receded and turned into lakes today. And, you know, they drag rocks and they do other things to show evidence of such. And supposedly they did not touch. There was a narrow path known as the ice-free corridor between those two ice sheets. So they assume, right, that the Native Americans traveled right through there. Then in addition to that, they found in like 1996, they did a DNA test, and provided that they had people that were pretty fully Native American and fully West Asian. They found the genetic markers Diego allele and GMAT that are very rare, evidently. They found them in large numbers amongst these two groups. So some people to this day consider that as pretty convincing proof of DNA ties. Okay. However, people look at that, right? And they say, some people, it's not enough. Then you look at the words that are shared by some of the Alaskan natives and those over in Siberia and toward Mongolia. There is cultural borrowing of words and loan words when you trade with somebody. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're of the same blood because they share some words. So then in addition to that, right, it says here that at Monteverde, and I won't even try that place in Brazil with a Portuguese name, they carbon dated human remains and some of their utensils and so forth to 30,000 years ago. Well, so much for us them coming 13,000 years ago, right? And then in addition to that, they went through what would have been the ice-free corridor, and they found a very scant piece of evidence of a carbon footprint. And the carbon footprint, right, is signs that you leave behind that you had lived here, right? Your refuse, your garbage, your whatever. And they found little to nothing along the ice-free corridor. So because of that, right, I'm running with that data, that selected data. And I'm saying, see, science can only get you so far. So while science has made some astoundingly impressive inferences, it has not and likely cannot ever render a definitive account of Native American history before Columbus's arrival. Right? So I gave you an example. I wrote something up, okay? So bear with me because I don't think it's that good, but at least I hope it gives you an idea of what I'm looking for. So the analysis, remember I got to cite the thesis. Section 1 of the Native American handout states that modern science can, quote, only get us so far. So you could quote a little part of it if you wanted to, in formulating an historical narrative of what happened when. The section begins by granting a concession to the opposing argument that methods like C14 dating, etc., shed light in forming an historical narrative. It then, however, provokes skepticism of such methods, showing their limitations and citing exceptional circumstances in which those methods will fail to yield definitive information. For instance, see, now I'm giving an example. It states that dendrochronology will not work with complacent trees, and that carbon-14 dating will not provide an accurate chronology if the amount of C14 in the atmosphere has not remained constant. The primary piece of evidence used to diminish confidence in modern science's capacity to create an ancient historical narrative, however, is in refuting C. Vance Haynes' thesis of Native Americans migrating from the steppes of Asia during the latest alleged ice age. The writer discourages trust in Haynes' scientifically derived theory by way of citation of 2 carbon-dated sites in South America prior to this timetable, and by way of stressing the scarcity of evidence for ancient humans having traversed the ice-free corridor. Now, so notice, right? That's my analysis, okay? And now here's the evaluation. The writer cites his or her facts relatively faithfully and uses examples in support of his or her thesis that science cannot provide a definitive record. However, highlighting limitations and aberrant or out of the ordinary cases of scientists' previous findings proving wrong does not merit an overhaul of all methods as permanently incapable of discerning truth. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Future advances in knowledge and technology may render a clear sight into the ancient past achievable, as there must exist plenty of hypotheses garnered from the aforementioned methods that have indeed passed the test of time already. That Haynes' theory may presently appear implausible, and that many methods do not yield trustworthy data under all circumstances, should not discourage fine-tuning the methods we have and discovering future means to continue our aim for definitive acquisition of truths. So notice what I said, right? I said, you know what? This was kind of manipulative, right? Okay, anybody could find aberrant or out of the ordinary cases in which a certain method won't work, right? And okay, C. Vance Haynes. Okay, great. It was a popular theory, and it may have arguably been disproven. Okay, so what, we throw out all of those methods that I mentioned at the beginning of the section because C. Vance Haynes was wrong about 13,000 years ago? So to me, right, I'm saying in my evaluation, I think the writer is being too manipulative with the data. Right, or not strong enough with the data. Okay, so does that help at all? I hope so. I hope that helps a little bit. Thank you, Brian. Okay, thank you, Giselle. So yeah, I just want you to, like I said, show me that you discern the thesis. Give me an example or two that were used by the writer in defending that thesis, and then go in whatever direction you want as far as how credible it is or isn't in your eyes. Okay? And then notice before we adjourn, okay, because I don't want to keep you too long, especially on the first one. But well, heck, if I don't have it, then I'm not going to worry about it. But I had initially put up the Aztec one. Yeah. This one is a little bit different, okay? What I do, right? These are so cool, by the way. The Aztec, right? They had books. So did the Maya, right? They were known as codices, or singularly as a codex. And they're written on paper. Of course, they were hieroglyphic, very colorful, and quite voluminous. Yeah, they were real thick. And so at any rate, right, what the Spaniards did is we'll get into the details, but the Spaniards translated them, okay, into Spanish. And so now we have that in many modern languages as a direct source, a primary source from the Maya and the Aztec. So with the Aztec, right, being in Mexico City in Tenochtitlan, and a lot of Mexican Americans having Aztec blood, I thought it was worth looking through a couple of their codices, and it's not simply choosing the data that I thought was interesting, right? I'd like to think that it was a little deeper than that. But in some of these cases, right, I am trying to kind of, maybe give a sense of pride to Mexican Americans. Maybe I'm finding some of this stuff that I think is very impressive. Also on my mind are is the desire to convey the fact that the Aztec and the Spanish were not as polarly antithetical to each other, opposite to each other as we like to think they were. They had some similarities. So just keep like those types of things in mind if you don't mind when you do this one, because this one's a little different, right? This one is not like an opinionated piece and you're given your analysis and evaluation. This one, you're doing a little bit more work, at least, intellectually, is go through it and read the data and what impressions does it elicit from you about the Aztec? If you're Mexican American, does it make you feel proud? Well, what exact characteristics make you feel such pride? Again, are there some similarities with the Spaniards? Okay, that people maybe weren't quite aware of before reading the codices. Are just the opposite? Are there cases in which, okay, that is definitely not going to be taken well by the Spaniards, and they're gonna butt heads on it? Okay, so I'm kind of leaving more up to you on this assignment, and I don't know that I do it ever again after this one. The rest of them go back to the same argumentative format that I had before. Okay, but like I said, this Aztec one, the Mexica, it's a little bit different in that way. I'm putting it a little bit more on you to make sense with the data that means something to you that you read in here. Okay. So do you guys feel decent about this? Do you guys feel somewhat confident once I start putting the assignments up and so forth? Good, thank you, Giselle. All right, so thank you, Monte. Before we adjourn, does anybody have any comments or questions? Anything else? Right. I know it sounds cheesy, but I like you guys already. You guys are good students. I could tell. All right. So, and I hope you find some of this stuff interesting, and not just interesting especially for Mexican Americans. I hope you find it meaningful. Okay. So at any rate, I'll do my best. Like I said, my desire's there. I did a semester in Saltillo, Coahuila in Mexico when I was in college, and I did another semester in San Jose, Costa Rica. And so I'm not Latino, but I love the culture. I love it. All right. So you guys take care, okay? And I wish you well. Thank you, Giselle. Wish you guys well, okay? All right, bye you guys. Take care.